We are appreciative of the opportunity to share from our perspective. Matt has been very involved in our adoption and use of MindBridge to this point in time. Just a real very brief introduction. We're not a large firm. We're about our assurance team consists of about 15 folks. Resources are not just flowing everywhere, but it's something that we are very intentional about. And I'll talk just kind of highlight that as we go through our discussion. The first part from our perspective, from a firm perspective, and then also give insight into the real life perspective side of things, both from an internal and an external. And then we'll finish up with kind of a fast forward, look ahead, and try to give you some do's and don'ts based on our experience. So just from a firm perspective, just from the MindBridge and data tools in general, this is something that's part of who we are. Our vision statement includes that we want to be an innovative firm. We feel like we need to look ahead and embrace technologies as they come down the pipe in order to provide a competitive advantage in our space. And so it's part of who we are. Early adopter, we definitely want to be an adopter of technology on the front side of things. If you want to use that as an adoption bell curve, we want to be on the front side. We do not want to be on the back side. And that's an intentional decision on our part. Future driven, looking ahead, what does the assurance practice look like 3 years from now? What does services in general look like 3 to 5 to 7 years from now? Those are questions that we want to entertain internally and listen to outside sources to challenge us on that. Kind of a change in mindset in that regard is we're definitely pushing more towards a transactional environment. And tools such as MindBridge push you towards a transactional based type engagement audit. And we look at this as investments, both in people and raising our skill sets and then investing in applications. It's an evolving environment. And we don't know the answers. I think that's probably been the theme of most firms over the last month and a half is we don't know all the answers. And we don't know all the answers when it comes to what's this all going to look like. But we have to invest in finding those out. And then we just feel like it adds to firm value. And that's just a very intangible aspect, both from a client opportunity perspective, a staff retention and recruiting perspective, and just our place out in the market.
Appreciate that, Myron. Thank you all for being on the call this morning. Look forward to sharing some detailed level, but try to stay as high level analysis as possible when looking at kind of how we implemented MindBridge from an internal and from an external perspective. And so we're really talking about how the value was driven internally. And so just kind of a couple bullet points here that I wanted to mention this morning. Obviously, if you've been in MindBridge, you've realized that they are extremely well at creating these visuals and disaggregated visuals. And so with that comes along the ability that us as preparers, staff members, to be able to create better planning environments. And so you're obviously looking at detail in different realms. And so it's not basically over a year-to-year comparison. You're more looking at it month to month, day by day, things of that nature. And so it really creates a better planning opportunity on the front end when you're doing your planning meetings. And then it also kind of just gels right into the rest of your actual procedures that take place. And whether it be analytics or anything of that nature, these visualizations really help present better audit evidence looking forward. So wanted to kind of touch base on that. And then also the aspect of client familiarity with ERP systems. I know firsthand, after implementing MindBridge into our firm, we had to learn what kind of work backwards. We obviously knew what system they were using, but knowing the ins and outs and the details of how we need to get specific data from their data sets to maybe to be into Excel to be able to import into these data tools is something that we had to work pretty hard at. And obviously every ERP system is different. And so you kind of have to know your clients. And so you think you know your clients when you're going through the audit process, but until you pull their data from their ERP system, you really get to dig deep and understand how they're making transactions. And I know Myron mentioned becoming more transactional based. And so client familiarity was a key part in making sure that the implementation was went smoothly internally for us. Intentional, this all goes back to kind of that data and getting it from the client. We had to be intentional about creating a good time frame to do that. We couldn't go a week before the planning meeting or the week before we're supposed to go out to the client and ask them to go ahead and give us their data backup or provide exports into Excel. You can't get your hands into it because this is going to be a software that you're going to want to get your hands messy with it and to dig into the details and allow the tool to work for you. And so just being intentional about that was extremely important. 100% of the data, I know just from my experience in the audit world, at first we were definitely dealing with GLs, trial balances, but you didn't really get to see the whole picture of the back end. And so sticking with this ERP system theme, you're getting 100% of the data. You're able to see every single transaction. The tool is going to help you push through and understand the relationships between the data and the different accounts. And so it's just really cool to see you're actually looking at 100% of the data, not just selecting a few samples here and there, but you're actually able to see trends, analysis, and things of that nature based on 100% of the data. And then I know we're going to move forward to the next slide here, but we're also in our firm exploring options with reviews. And so we've actually prepared a couple visualizations to let you see kind of how this is moving forward into our firm, into our practice. You can see that this is actually a visualization from the MindBridge AI Auditor tool. And so we are in the process of implementing this into our review procedures. A couple things I wanted to note here. Obviously, you can see at the top, we've got an expectation and a conclusion. Now, one thing I want to note is if you bring your attention to that forecasted line there, you can see that the AI tool is basically taking this grouping, the contract receivables, and it's forecasting where it expected it to be for the current year. And so I know we're not quite there in our firm yet. I know Myron and I, we've actively been working on getting it there. But this forecast could eventually become our stated expectation for what the account is expected to do based off of 5 years of historical trend. You can see there's years over there. We've kind of graded them out so you can get a better visual of what's happened in the current year and the prior year. But the tool is doing a lot of that work, the expectation, helping preparers come up with those expectations. It's doing it for you. And so just kind of wanted to bring your attention to kind of the expectation and conclusion of what we maybe would have done in the past, and then really kind of show you that the bridge that MindBridge AI is doing is actually alleviating some of the steps that we would have to take, where it's going ahead and creating that expectation on a better detailed level than we could ever imagine. One thing to note on here, the visualization, you can see it's disaggregated by month. And obviously it's great to see that because you're not just doing kind of a year over year comparison. You're really looking at monthly transactions. But I just kind of wanted to show how the contract receivables by month compared to the contract payables by month. And you kind of get to this analysis part where you start to see trends and you start to see examples of how things are related, and we would expect those to be related. So obviously contract payables would try to follow along with what we would expect with contract receivables and also revenue. And so with that being said, you can see this graph and this visualization does confirm that pretty much to an exact science. If you were to go back to the prior slide, you would see that the exact same spikes in the month, it relatively followed pretty much exactly the same. And so really cool aspects of tools that we're being able to kind of experiment and really try to bring into our review process. And so we will continue to work with that, but just wanted to pass that along with you so you could see some of those actual analytical tools being put into place.
So I'll just add one thing to that real quick. One of the things that we've been talking about internally is, and I know folks at MindBridge have been really great in listening to feedback. I think that's been a very positive for us, and so we appreciate all the feedback that we've been allowed to share, because one of the areas that we kind of keep talking about is we want this to potentially be the single source of documentation, which is kind of where Matt was headed with this, because these comments that are added are done within the tool, and we want those to be able to fairly seamlessly come over into our document placeholder from an engagement standpoint. And so that's something that we've been talking about. I think the folks at MindBridge have been listening to that, because that is definitely part of the audit piece. The documentation and complying with standards is all part of the piece of getting these things weaved into our documentation. And that's something, that we, like most firms, it's something that we definitely put high on the list, because complying with the applicable standards is something that obviously all of us should take very seriously and be very intent about. But however, being able to do it and add the documentation within the tool is something I know that Matt has been that's really a big step forward in being able to, from an application standpoint.
And maybe just one thing that I'll add to that: once you're able to put this into the tool, the efficiency and effectiveness that is gained going forward after the first year is extreme. You're going to be created within the tool, and they just kind of roll forward. And so a lot of the effort that's used on the front end is already there and will translate into multiple years going forward. I guess I'll hand this back over to Myron for our next slide, mainly talking about the driven value externally.
And just add on to that, the Matt mentioned the disaggregation piece, which was already there. Being able to ask, and you might say, well, a review, how far do we want to take something in a review engagement, for those of you all familiar with the review and audit versus an audit, which is obviously at a much higher level from an evidence standpoint and how far you want to go. But being able to ask a question that says, it kind of goes to, maybe I'm jumping ahead to the second bullet point, but being able to ask what happened in what month is a much better question potentially than what happened at a point in time, being the year end of the client. And so I know Matt's experienced that. Kind of goes into that. Matt experienced that with the client early on, of that we were very upfront sharing our use of this tool, and their feedback to us was, you're really asking better questions, and that, I think that was a good energy boost for the folks that were on that team to get that feedback from the client perspective, which kind of relates back to my second bullet point. So yeah, from an external standpoint, it is, hey, this is who we are. It's a demonstration of that. This is what we want to be. This is how we want to be providing value to our clients in the future. And then the 100% part, why I put that on there, why we put that on there, just to give you a little bit of context to that, is kind of tongue in cheek. I've had clients in an audit conclusion phase potentially come back and say, so you're saying that everything is okay. And that's that perspective expectation from what we are doing when issuing an opinion on a set of financial statements. And so the clients have kind of potentially thought we've been looking at a lot of things when we haven't been. But with a tool, with a data analytic tool, MindBridge, it being one of them, you really have got that 100% coverage. And to Matt's earlier comment on that, so I don't go, and I'm not advocating to say everything is okay, obviously, but I feel like that in essence we're kind of feeling probably maybe a little bit better about what we have looked at and the body of data that we are considering. So that's definitely something that has some application going forward, kind of going back to my earlier comment on a transactional type approach, rather than it just be a balanced look at a point in time. So a couple things. One, I don't think it's necessarily a one metric kind of evaluation. Well, when Matt and I were talking about this, the don'ts usually come from the partner group. because we tend to find reasons to maybe not do something. So evaluating on one metric, am I going to be more efficient in our audit engagements? I think that's probably a recipe for not a really deep adoption of new technology in general. There's definitely a learning curve. There's definitely how do we use it curve. How do we benefit from it most effectively? Journal entry testing, I know, has been out there as, hey, this is something that's pretty low hanging fruit. But internally, our challenge has been we've got to take it further. We've got to take it beyond any of those kind of low hanging fruits. We feel like the review engagements can have application outside. Limit training. Training is needed. Don't squeeze too hard on that from a budget standpoint or from a who do you think needs to know. That's something that we learned. We didn't have enough broad training. So I would encourage folks to look at that pretty significantly in their implementation plan. And then my third bullet on that is just swimming too long down in the kiddie pool. And it's definitely part of our culture and part of who we are. We tend to kind of just go ahead and jump in. And so I would encourage you to not look at it as let's just stick our toe in again, because I think you're going to be probably not as fulfilling as saying, okay, we've got to be willing to go out to the middle of the pool and really invest in this. Matt, you want to just jump in on the do's?
Yeah, just quickly here. Early communication with client is going to be key. Getting that information up front so that we can put it into the system. It takes time, the first couple go rounds, and so doing that as quickly as possible, creating that time frame, maybe a month before the engagement's actually technically supposed to start. You grab this information, that's going to be key. Identify champions. I know we did that in our firm, and it's helped immensely. Kind of let them learn what not to do and what to do, and then they can pass that knowledge on to other people within our firm. Invest in an implementation plan. Spend time up front to really plan out how you're going to go about implementing new tools such as MindBridge AI, and then spread the knowledge. Make those champions really go into meetings and pass down the information they've learned, their experiences, to be able to make sure you kind of get that the buy-in that's needed to be able to make sure this is a successful implementation. And that's kind of all we had for the do's.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, both Myron and Matthew.